Welcome into the Stardom Fantasy Football Podcast. I am your host, Stefen McKinney, joined as always by Ashton Mitchell and Jacob Stevens. How's it going today, guys?
Hey,
Going.
It's going. That's what I like to hear. We got a little bit different of an episode today. We're going to take a little break from our rankings and kind of just do, something that was suggested by some of our listeners, but more of a fantasy 101 or fantasy for beginners, that kind of thing. Tune us back into our, first time playing fantasy football, dial it back a little bit and just kind of go over the basics. So we'll see if we can do a good job explaining it. We've all been playing for at least a few years now, so it's hard to kind of change that mindset of how we're going to discuss fantasy football, but we'll give it a go. We still do have a couple good ranking episodes coming out before the season starts, but we do only have 22 days left until the first game of the NFL season. I know you guys are getting excited.
Oh, yeah, baby. Getting pumped up.
It's getting close. It snuck up on me this year, but definitely super, super excited to have football
And
back.
the fantasy drafts they're all coming. Our big one is next weekend.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm getting pretty jazzed up about that as well. We ordered a trophy today, so things are looking up.
We're also trying to think of ideas for the last place team. So you guys have anything fun that y'all do in your leagues or something a little bit out of the ordinary, send them in to us. Maybe it'll be a good idea for us to adopt in some of our leagues. But, yeah, I'm looking forward to our leagues this year, looking forward to getting some drafts started. As drafts do start to kick off, make sure you're tuning in, especially with our rankings episodes, so you're ready for your draft. But let's jump right into the news here, guys. The ones I have, feel free to add any extra news that you guys think of off the top of your head. But the two best tight ends in football, Travis Kelce and George Kittle, both receiving big contracts this year. But that's nothing that we didn't expect. They're both centerpieces of those offenses in Kansas City and San Francisco. So, we didn't expect that they wouldn't be paid out for it. Also, we have Dez Bryant. If you've been playing fantasy football for long enough, Dez Bryant is an absolute beast when it came to fantasy football. But he is working out for the Baltimore Ravens. I know that there have been news about him potentially working out for a couple other teams, but I know the Ravens have been trying to work out a couple different people. They had talks with Antonio Brown maybe to get him out there to work out, but we'll see if Dez Bryant is a good fit for that offense with Lamar Jackson, and that's an exciting offense. They could use a big guy in the red zone. I know they tried to get Miles Boykin last year to be that kind of guy, and never seemed to take that step last year.
He was not that guy.
Yeah, so we'll see if Dez Bryant is the answer. And then the last piece of news that I thought, was just a good keynote for maybe a late round flyer, Justin Jackson, who is considered possibly the guy to get more of the running duties for the LA Chargers, is getting first team reps ahead of the rookie Joshua Kelly. We're all expecting Austin Eckler to get the bulk of the work there, but Austin Eckler is known for being a receiving style running back. So
lining up.
Yeah, so we might see Justin Jackson get a lot of potential carries, not only around the red zone, but just in general. He's going really late in drafts, so I think you can get some value taking a shot on Justin Jackson rather than just taking a random flyer and a guy that you hope works out. At least you can get some guaranteed work, I think, from Justin Jackson. But that is it for the news that I have. Is there anything else you guys wanted to add in there before we jump into it?
Alex Smith cleared for football. 100%. He's out there practicing, throwing the ball. I know y'all aren't the biggest football team supporters, but
it's definitely a great
I love
story.
How you say that, then I don't know what you're talking about, but then I know who you're talking about.
That's what they are. They're the Washington football team.
That football team.
The football team.
I knew we couldn't make it through a news segment without you bringing up the Washington football team news.
Oh, I have something. I don't know if we've talked about this, that Antonio Brown got suspended for 8 games. I don't know if we've talked about that since that's happened, but I'm still seeing people draft him. And as Stefen was talking about Dez Bryant coming and checking out the Ravens giving him a look, they did officially say that they will not sign Antonio Brown, which Lamar Jackson had been pushing for a bit. So maybe and I know Russell Wilson's also trying to get him out there as well, but they're more inclined to re-sign Josh Gordon if he can get back in.
Yep.
So yeah,
Yeah.
crazy stuff.
With a guy like Antonio Brown, he's obviously a huge name, especially if he played fantasy football before. He's been a wide receiver, overall wide receiver #1, multiple years. But don't get sucked into that name value. You're already guaranteed missing 8 games. He's not even on the team. We saw this a few years back with a different player who, maybe it was even Dez Bryant the year after the Cowboys let him go. But it's just, you can't fall into the trap of just a big name hoping that he comes back and makes a splash. I think people were doing that last year with Antonio Brown after he got cut, just hoping he gets signed with a team, and just it's a waste of a roster spot. You don't have that kind of flexibility to roster someone who's not even on the team. Please do not draft him.
Ain't nobody got time for that.
And unless he gets picked up early in the season and can serve his 8-game suspension, it's 8, right? 8-game suspension.
8, yeah.
He's only going to be a value at any point if that happens early and he can bring his talent later in the season. And even then, that's a waiver wire pickup at best. So keep him off your radar.
Yep, 100%. Well, guys, let's jump right into it. I am excited about this episode. I think it was kind of fun preparing for this episode. We all kind of ask our significant others or random friends I've never played before, just kind of some ideas. Like I know personally my fiance's never played fantasy football, so when I was trying to get some ideas for the show, I was asking her, like, if you were to play fantasy football, what would you want to know? Like, what are some questions you would have? And it was a lot. It was a lot funnier than I expected it to be. Like, just the idea of what she has, just not even knowing what fantasy football is in general. So I think we need to start at root one and just kind of break it down. To you guys, how would you explain what fantasy football is from a very vague, analysis?
Jacob, you want this, or you want me to dive into it first?
You can go ahead as I get my words together.
A basic explanation. So how I've tried to explain it to new people coming into leagues that I've been in before. Basically, you are managing and running your own team of real players, but in a fantasy setting, right? So the points that they earn on the field help build the points for your fantasy team, which help fight against the team that you're going against. I mean, it's
fighting. Wow.
Oh, it's fighting.
Aggressive.
Yeah.
I like
it's very competitive.
That's true.
If you feel like it's not, then we should have a talk outside of this conversation. But it's a way to disconnect from reality, but also be very involved in reality. And it's just a fun and exciting thing to get involved in. I think if especially for people that aren't interested or know a lot about football, I don't think there's a better way to get more involved into real football than through fantasy football. So especially if you're not a real sports centered person, or you want to become more involved in football, I think fantasy is an awesome gateway to get just where you want to be with that. So you learn a lot more about players that you haven't heard of.
That's true.
You can see the value of the players that you have heard of and understand how important they are to the teams that they're playing on. And you learn the sport on a deeper level than just sitting on a Sunday or Monday night and watching games. I mean, I grew up a football fan, but I learned so much more about each individual position and just a different level of understanding with the game, just getting involved, and so much more about players, and especially teams that you're not a fan of. I was a Redskins fan. I am a Redskins fan, a Washington football team fan.
Thank you.
But so it's a better way to understand other teams as well. So
yeah, that's true. So I'll just piggyback off that now that he's laid the groundwork for me, which is basically what I was getting at. So yeah, it is your interest in the game definitely changes. I'm a Cowboys fan, and before fantasy, all I would ever watch was Cowboys games. And Stefen here actually invited me to play in a league a few years back, and I had no idea what was going on. And basically, as Ashton kind of touched on, you're drafting real life players, and I wouldn't say it's math, but the game is based around predicting and adding up their scores, which based on their production in real life, it converts to fantasy points because we are living in a fantasy land where we're playing this awesome game. And so, yeah, I mean, you don't have to have a particular team. You could be a fan of any player that's on your team. You get to name your team name. You can make up fun names with players on your team. And it's normally revolved around, you get a quarterback, which is one of the tougher positions. Was just to kind of, you get one player for that, but you got quarterback, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends. If you don't know any of that stuff, that's okay. You'll figure it out.
Yeah, I think if you've ever questioned your ability to be analytical, play fantasy football and you'll quickly find out whether you have that inside of you or not. I mean, it's
right.
Yeah, I think you guys did a great job just kind of explaining it. So I won't try to explain it too much more, but I think it is a great way, just like you were saying, Ashton, a great way to fall in love with the game. You don't have to be a huge fan of football to play fantasy. It's fun to – you basically create your own team of random players from every NFL team. You know, you're kind of in control of your destiny and how you put together a team. So, you know, maybe you've heard of Tom Brady, or maybe you've heard of Drew Brees or someone like that, where, you know, it's exciting to get one of those guys on your team.
Yeah.
And you can watch them every week, and you can root for individual players and therefore root for teams and enjoy watching football because, you know, they're on your team and you're rooting for them to do well. But just to kind of add a little bit more of us, you know, you're playing different players that you know, your friends and family. So one week I can play Ashton and we can go head to head, and that's the only person who it matters about when I'm playing them. So Jacob can score 200 points,
which I will.
If I'm not playing Jacob, then, you know, that's irrelevant to me. You're just doing a
matchup based.
Until playoffs hit.
Yeah. So it's head-to-head matchups every week, just like the NFL teams are playing. But you're getting points based on that individual player's performance. It doesn't matter if their team wins. It doesn't matter how their team does overall. As long as that one player that you have on your team is performing in terms of statistical, you know, yards, touchdowns, that kind of thing. That's all that really matters in terms of your fantasy scoring, as it will. It doesn't matter if the team is performing or doing well. It just matters that your individual players are performing. But I mean, that kind of explains it at a higher level. We're going to get a little bit more into detail about, you know, scoring or your roster and things like that as well. But I think from a overview perspective, I think that kind of wraps it up. But I do want to hear about y'all's first experience. Like when you guys first started playing fantasy football, what was it like for y'all? Is there anything that you guys remember from back then that you guys can share?
You did it in the newspapers back then, right, Ashton? Isn't that how it started?
Yeah, we actually drafted by smoke signals.
You had to mail in your starting lineup to your teammate.
We actually, my first couple seasons, we drafted in person off of a board, which was a lot of fun. And we did this last year, which was do we use a board or we use like a dry
we had
erase?
a board.
Yeah.
We're doing it next week.
So that was, I love when we do stuff like that because it reminds me of the times I first started playing fantasy. But we did it on a board. I got second place my first year, which was, I think half of that was just pure luck. And then, you know, it was just I immediately fell in love with it. You know, it was one of those things that it captured my attention like every day and every week, and I was just constantly on ESPN and watching Sports Center every morning and every night to make sure I captured any clips or highlights that I missed during the weekend. So, I mean, I don't have too many memories of in detail of it, but I remember it was a lot of fun. Instantly fell in love with it, and couldn't get enough, and couldn't wait for the next season to happen.
Yeah, as I was talking about earlier, Stefen actually invited me into my first fantasy league, which was about 5 years ago. I think it was 2015 when I started, and it was really, really hard. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know how to draft. I was just drafting the person at the top of the list. Didn't always make sense. But here I am 5 years later. I'm just things have changed a lot. You know, once you actually put some time into it, you know, like Ashton said, you kind of start checking the scores. And this is obviously it's during football season. You can kind of take time off in the off season, but it's just really fun. It just brings a lot more entertainment. And I remember how bad I was then, and now how far I have come to the start of fantasy football podcast. Yeah, I mean, Stefen, you brought me into it, and I sucked at it, and that's pretty much how it happened.
Drafting was so different back when I started too. I don't know if you guys did this, but I had like before each draft night, I had a packet for each position that I was trying to draft for.
I did the same thing.
So I had a huge packet for all the top QBs, top running backs, top wide receivers. I had it all the way through for defenses and everything.
Yeah.
So like, I had a notebook and I would write down. I'd keep track of my team and try to keep track down of everyone else's team too, because some drafts we were doing, we were drafting in B-dubs, so it was loud, chaotic, crazy. I couldn't always see the board, you know what I mean? So I'm trying to keep my own personal notes. Oh, it was a nightmare.
Yeah,
I've
been here people getting age.
People getting started now don't realize how easy they have it. I mean, you can control everything on one screen.
Yeah, for sure.
Do it from your phone. God, man, what a mess that was back then.
I remember my first season I think it was back in 2008, I think, and some school buddies had invited me to join a league. I didn't know anything about fantasy football. I loved watching the Cowboys on Sundays, and that was basically it. But
you didn't know any better.
Just joined in. I did the same thing that you did in terms of I went online and did some research the day before and printed off like 20 pages of like research and like analysis on these players. I didn't know anything about ADP. I didn't know what ADP was. I didn't know that like the websites kept your roster for you. So every time I drafted someone, I'd write their name on a little piece of paper, like, okay, I got this guy. And then I'd just try to figure it out myself.
Just remind people what ADP is again.
So average draft position. We'll get into that too in one of our next pieces. But I remember I took Tom Brady first overall. I had the first overall pick. I took Tom Brady.
Oh, what a terrible pick.
I think he did end up being the number one quarterback that year, which was just lucky. Like that was basically, I knew Tom Brady was a great player. So
I've heard of him.
I'll go ahead and take that guy. But yeah, I had a lot of fun. And it was a great way for me to get really more into football in terms of not just watching the Cowboys, but just enjoying football.
Yeah, all games. Exactly.
And enjoying, like being competitive again and playing with friends, playing with family, and just having that extra little thing to talk about. And I mean, obviously we all fell in love with it enough to, we do a podcast every week to talk about it. So you do just kind of get sucked into it. It's really, really enjoyable. It's really another thing that you can, do in your free time. And I find myself looking at articles every week about players, even in the off season, things like that. So definitely a fun thing to do. Definitely highly recommended, even if you're not into football too much. But yeah, I mean, that kind of wraps it up for our first experience. I really am excited to talk about these next couple of things. So how do you, when you're looking to first get into your first league, how do our listeners get into a league? Like, what's y'all's recommendation for their first ever time playing fantasy football? How do they get started?
Get into someone else's league.
Yeah, find a trusted friend.
Don't start your own.
Yeah, find a trusted friend and join another league. Don't commission your own league right away.
Yeah. And if you don't have anyone that that plays or has a league or has a spot for you to play in a league, there are open public leagues you can play all over the place.
Yeah.
ESPN is a really popular site for drafting and just having fantasy. That's one of the main ones we use. It's very clean. It's very easy to use for the end users for sure. But basically from that point, you just join in a league and you're kind of determine what kind of league you want to be in, which we're going to touch on that in a bit here. But ESPN, Yahoo Fantasy, and there's also a lot of other sports too if you like other sports, but that's kind of that's the easiest way to get into one is look around for a league, make a post on your Facebook, your social media, whatever you got, try to find a league to get into. Can't find one, just join a public league. Get started.
I would also recommend, this doesn't have to be your only league, but find a league that isn't a pot league, a money pot league.
Yeah.
Free league. Maybe.
Just find a league. Just find a league that you can have fun with. That's not gonna, you're not gonna be making this. You're not going to. Well, even if it was a $5, it.
I'm gonna have to take another mortgage out.
Yeah,
I got you.
it's best just to have a league where you can just relax and learn it and have fun and know that there's no payout whatsoever at the end. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Just I still play in a couple of those where it's just for fun. I mean, it's you're paying for
Respect
the right
on the streets.
Yeah, basically a whole bag of
Bragging
respect.
rights.
So
yeah.
But I would recommend joining one of those as well.
Yep. Yeah, 100%. I mean, try to find a league with your friends, your family. A lot of companies like work. There's always
Work. Yeah,
leagues.
work for sure.
Just try to get invited to one. Ask around, and just ask questions as well, because the people you're going to be in leagues with they're all. I mean, usually most leagues are just filled with people trying to have fun, and be able to hang out with their friends and talk about football. So ask questions. Ask, how you get points. Ask who I should take. Ask who I should start. That kind of thing. Like, just have fun with it, especially your first year. Just figure out how it works. Figure out, the way that you want to play, and just enjoy it, man. Like, figure it out your first year, learn about fantasy football, and then, once you feel like you got a little bit more serious, you got a little bit of experience under your belt, try to do a little bit more next year. Maybe join a couple leagues, maybe do a money league, things like that. But I also recommend if you are willing to play some money on it, maybe try out the weekly fantasy ones like FanDuel or DraftKings, and just get a feel for it there too. They do promotions all the time where they do like free entries and stuff like that. So if you just want to do a free week and see how it is, that's always cool too. Okay, so now that they've joined a league, now that they've gotten into their league, they got their draft set up. It's time to get going. How do they know who they should be drafting? How do they know how to build their team? First off, let's talk. Okay, so once you're into a league, the first step is to do a draft. Every team has to build every player, I guess, has to build their team. You see everything from 8-man up to 20-man leagues, and each person in those leagues have to draft a team or put together a team of their individual players on NFL teams. So when we're jumping into the draft, how do we know who we're drafting? Do we have a strategy going in? Like, how do you guys prepare for the draft? How do you know who to pick when it's your turn to pick?
Well, they need to listen to our show.
You listen to the Stardom Fantasy.
Listen to Stardom Fantasy. Yeah.
Also, how to drafts work in general too, I guess. As a good
yeah.
point.
Yeah. So actually, I would say here. Let me hop in real quick, Ashton. I'll let you take it. I would just say before you have your actual draft, you need to be participating in mock drafts, which are also at all these websites where you can kind of pick which spot you're going to be, because you really don't know unless you guys do kind of competitions to figure out the order. But we don't. We normally just randomize it. But you can do mock drafts all the time as you're getting ready for the season.
Yep, they're free to do.
Seriously, listening
every
to podcasts.
5 minutes. So.
Yeah, every 5 minutes. I mean, it's not like it's going to take you a little while. It's like probably 30, 45 minutes to do, but do it on your lunch break. Do it at night when you got nothing to do. You can draft from a lot of certain spots from early, middle, late, and kind of you get a feel for it, and you look at your team. And some Fantasy Pros even gives you a grade. Stefen obviously learned how to rig that, so you might want to talk to him because he beat us.
Collusion.
But that would be one of the first steps, I would think. As long as also listen to podcasts, like Ashton was saying, it doesn't have to be ours unless you want to win championships and bring home fantasy glory. But listen to podcasts, do your research. What else you got, Ashton?
I mean, yeah, and we'll dive into more of our tips and advice later in the show. But getting started, knowing, I think you're nailing it with the mock drafts. Find out what kind of league you're going to be in, whether it's standard, half point, or full PPR. Pick those selections when you're doing the mock draft. And I would do mock draft after mock draft after mock draft. Because if you're getting started, that's exactly how you're going to get a feel for how the real draft is going to go. And you need to try it with every slot position available. So you know what it's like to draft at 1 overall, or, at the 12 spot. So figure it out. Most leagues, most leagues are 10 to 12 manager leagues. And if you're going deeper leagues like 14 or 16-team leagues, I mean, best of luck.
That's
especially getting
tough.
started.
But
Highly
12
recommend.
men.
I highly recommend going 10 or 12
Yep.
while you get started with fantasy football.
Mhm.
But it's one of those things where practice makes perfect, and that even goes with fantasy football. So I recommend doing the mock drafts as much as
And
possible.
draft with a friend too. If
Yeah.
you kind of don't know, if you still don't know what you're doing just quite yet, you can always draft with a friend. We had a really good time getting into the same draft the other day. It took us a while, but we got together and we drafted, and it's something you
And
can definitely do as well.
and take notes on who's getting drafted where, and then research those players. And then that's a good way to get started and get familiar with some of these players that are going in certain rounds, especially early on.
Yep.
And that's a good way to dive in and get familiar with these names that you're going to want to keep an eye out for when you have your real draft.
Yep. I know a lot of people in their first start, they don't have a lot of time set aside for researching before drafts and things like that. But websites nowadays do make it really, really easy on you in terms of the draft process. They have ADPs, which is average draft position. So you can see where other people who are doing the same drafts as you are taking these players. So you're not just grabbing some random guy who gets drafted in the 6th or 7th round in the first round. They basically have it all set out in front of you, who's getting drafted where. It doesn't mean you have to take them where they're being drafted. It just means these are typically how the drafts are going to work. Like this is the order that they're typically going to fall. You can see the projected points for the year. So those are the experts that are projecting exactly how many points that they're going to score for that season. So that's great when you're first starting. I mean, just having that information available in front of you is super, super crucial when you're first starting a draft. So I recommend definitely doing one where you're on your computer rather than in person on your first draft, just so you can kind of get a feel for it, get more accustomed to it all. But also, you got to understand that with drafts, typically they're in a snake format. So if you are in a random order draft where say that you get the second pick, that means you're going to get the second to last pick in the next round. So it's going to keep alternating. So kind of plan that out when you're making your picks. Be aware that you are going to have to draft in that fashion throughout the entire draft. And then also one thing to keep in mind, or two things that I have to keep in mind is you'll typically have your roster on your left side or wherever it is on the website that you're drafting, so you can see how your team's kind of filling out. So whether that be, you're taking 7-8 running backs, you can see that so that you can keep in mind, here's where I need to draft. I need to draft wide receivers. I need to draft quarterbacks. Like it kind of keeps track for you, so you don't have to keep referring back to what your picks were. So websites nowadays just make it super, super easy. Just kind of stick to staying around the ADPs that are in front of you. Don't try to reach too far down the list when you are drafting, unless it's really, really late rounds. But that's definitely when you're when you're a beginner. Follow those ADPs, follow the expert projections, things like that, and just build a really strong team based on other people's knowledge. Just to kind of start.
And keep an eye on your bye weeks too. Your players' bye weeks. I mean that's important, and that's they have that on all the online drafts for a reason. So you don't draft all your star players or your starting lineup on the same bye week. So
What's a bye week, Ashton?
a bye week is a week where the team gets a week off. They're not playing that week. So
Normally, I think that number
one.
is next to their name.
Yep.
When they're being drafted as well.
Yeah, and when you draft them online, most websites or most companies that are doing these drafts online, they auto fill them in. So you draft Tom Brady, they're going to auto fill him into a quarterback slot, and they'll have his position, and then he'll have his bye week usually over to the right. Mm-hmm. So just keep an eye on the bye week and make sure you're not drafting. Say you draft a backup quarterback and you have Tom Brady up there too. They don't make sure they're not on the same bye week. Otherwise, you're going to have to pick up a waiver QB. So.
Yep. Every NFL team has one bye week, so 1 week that they're just not playing. So obviously, you're not going to play that guy when they're not playing. You don't get any points if they don't play. Super, super important.
I have one more thing. Sorry, on just knowing which players to pick. Obviously, the ADP is there, but when you're looking at that, you also need to see what they did last year. That's definitely a big indicator of how things are going to go this year, and their age as well. Those are just kind of looking at last year. Definitely affects on. I mean, how a player did last year changes how we're going to draft him this year. Like Stefen drafted Lamar Jackson in the 10th or 11th round last year. and he was the QB1 in fantasy. So he's going a lot higher this year, but we know that what he can do based on what he did last year. And he hadn't have any injury setbacks or anything like that. So kind of knowing the history of what these players have done and their kind of their age and where they're at in their careers is something that could be beneficial when you try to decide who to pick.
Yep. And usually those stats are right in front of you. You can just click on their name on most websites, and it'll show you where they finished. It'll show you how many points they scored, etc. But yeah, definitely important to see how they did last year. Sometimes you're going to see 0 points. That's probably a rookie, or they were injured for the entire season. But yeah, I mean, stick to the ADP, stick to the points projected, stick to last year's results. You probably put together a pretty good team. So now that we've drafted a team, we have our team set. What do we do now? Like, how does it work? How do I actually play fantasy football now that I have a team?
Draft is over.
Yep, draft's done.
So draft is over. Your schedule should be set so you can see who you're playing week 1.
Mm-hmm.
You need to set your lineup.
What's on my lineup? What do you mean my lineup?
So you're starting. Say you're in a standard league, or
mm-hmm.
let's just go standard. You get a quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, a flex, usually a flex position, a kicker, and a defense.
What's a flex?
Flex is usually a flex position. This is customizable, but you can usually flex position as a running back, a wide receiver, or a tight end. You can fill it to play that position.
Okay.
So choose wisely. But you want to set your starting lineup and then watch that starting lineup throughout the week until the game starts. So you don't have to make any changes because things happen during
injuries,
practice. Yes. Yep. And especially this year, if you're getting started in fantasy football this year, what a crazy year to get started, because now you have to deal with COVID, the possibility of COVID. So you got to keep an eye on your roster, all because you set it, and then you set it on that Monday, but your first game is on Sunday. You got to keep an eye on it, because things can change very quickly.
Yep.
Yeah, and make sure
know how to fill the spot if something needs to be changed.
Right. And also hopping on that, Ashton, make sure these leagues you're in this year, make sure they have IR slots for these COVID players. If they don't, try to put it to a vote. Get the league to add them.
If they don't, you're just gonna have to manage your bench as best as possible.
Right. Well, that's what I was about to talk about. Starting your lineup like you do, like Ashton just kind of walked you through on where you're going to start. But you do have your bench players as well. You're drafting for depth, and that's what you have to choose from, rotating. And sometimes those bye weeks, it comes into account. But you look at your projections. You get the ESPN and most of these websites, they provide you with what these guys are projected to score. And it's going to say that, hey, you're projected 110 points. Stefen's projected 92 points. Something like that is you can see kind of where you are. You can move players in and out that are projected higher based on their matchups, on they're playing a team that can kind of shut down a wide receiver or shut down the running backs a little bit better than other teams. So you kind of go from those projections, and that's kind of how you start it.
And that's all it is. It's just a projection. It's not a guarantee. So don't look at it and say, well, I'm projected to win 10 points. Oh, I got this in the bag, because that can very quickly change.
Yep. Look at the matchups. Stay up to date.
Yeah. And it's important to understand that you're going to draft when you're drafting a team to build a foundation for the whole season, but you're not going to end up with all those players that you drafted. You're drafting a team based on what we're expecting, before the season starts. But we're going to see players that are going to break out and have great years that don't even get drafted. And we're going to see players who get drafted really high that have terrible years. So just because they're being drafted in the first round or the second round or really high up doesn't mean that they're going to be super, super great. Players do get injured. We see rookies break out. We see all kinds of different things happen. There's no guaranteed way to win fantasy football. This is all just projections, predictions, your kind of thought process on players. So just because you drafted someone doesn't mean you have to start them. You're going to be dropping players all year. You're going to be picking people up on the waiver wire. The wire.
What? What's the waiver wire?
Every week the waiver wire is going to open up. Typically on Tuesdays, right after the Monday night game is over. We're into a new week of NFL football. The waiver wire is all the players that are still available for teams to pick up. They're not
that
on
didn't get drafted.
right? Whether they didn't get drafted or they've been dropped by a different team, whatever the case may be, they're not on any other manager's team. So then you typically how waiver wires are set up is that you get a chance to win that player for your team. So you're going to submit, to pick up that player. And then when the waiver wire runs, it typically ends on a Wednesday night or a Thursday morning. You'll see if you actually won that player because other people have to have the opportunity to pick them up as well. And depending on your waiver order based on your position
and the system.
in the league. Yeah, there's different rules, but you're going to be picking up free agents all year to replace some of the players that aren't performing on your team. And you're going to be rotating them into your starting lineup. And, projections is definitely a big way just when you're first starting to kind of follow experts' projections on where they expect them to finish that week.
So in our league, Stefen, typically – how do you manage your waiver wire, and how many players are you typically trying to pick up on a weekly basis?
Yeah, I mean, it varies. It varies throughout the season. It depends on how you draft. You're going to see players immediately off the bat, like week 1, week 2, that are just underperforming. You're going to see players that break out really early. And there's always going to be stars in the waiver wire. Like waiver wire players win you your leagues. The players that you're like, what you're doing during the season, the draft is never going to win you your league. If you stick with the team that you draft all season and never make a transaction, you never pick up anybody, you will never win.
You are not winning.
League.
If you do win, send us the roster that you drafted.
Yes.
You drafted very
We'll send you
impressively.
something.
Yeah.
We'll have you on.
We'll get you a shirt or something.
But yeah, so I mean, the work's going to come in once you actually get the season started. You're going to be picking up players. You're going to be moving players constantly. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things to focus on, and there's a lot of shifting pieces. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of where we get started. That's kind of how we play during the season. Now that we have our team together, we're going to be moving people in and out of the starting lineup. We're going to be moving people in and out of our team. So it's constant movement with different players. But what about scoring? How do you score? Like, if a team scores a touchdown, do you score, or what are points based on? I guess is the question that a lot of people want to know.
So there are different scoring leagues, but we can stick to standard. There are PPR leagues, which are 1 point per reception. And then a lot of people are moving towards the half-point standard or half-point PPR, which is kind of gives receivers half a point for catching the ball. Stefen doesn't really understand why they deserve that point, even if they don't get any yards. You just get stopped at the line and get half a point there. But basically, like you say, we've got these projections. You don't know if your guys are going to do that, but for running backs, they get 1 point every 10 yards or 0.1 per yard, right? That's right.
Right, point per yard. I mean, so they get a point per 10 yards based on the 10 yards that they gain, not their team. So just because
that individual player.
Yeah, that you have to have that individual player has to earn those yards, not the team has to gain those yards. That player themselves has to earn the yards. But it's all based on their yards and their touchdowns, right? Because, I mean, this is all offensive players except for your defense. You're taking a team defense rather than individual players on a defense. So the defensive scoring gets a little bit more particular based on your league. But my recommendation is just check out your league scoring. It's usually just in the league information section on your website.
Scoring.
See how people score points in your league. It's always a lot of leagues have different scoring that add their own little twists and things like that. So make sure you are familiar with how you score points. But overall, it's individual stats based on yards and touchdowns for the most part. And then you have negative points when you have turnovers, interceptions, fumbles, that kind of thing. But yeah, it's all based on the individual statistics of that player, not the team's statistics.
All right.
Okay, so now that we've got our team, we know how we score points. How do I know which player to plug into my lineup? Like you said, I have bench players. You said I can pick up players on the waiver wire. How do I know who I'm starting that week? I know we have our projected points, but how do I know which guy is the guy?
This is where you have to kind of get analytical, and you have to start reviewing your players on a weekly basis pretty heavily.
Put in work.
You got to do the work. I mean, unfortunately, unless you just rely on, like I still have friends in leagues that auto draft every year, and then they do a quick Google search for 10 minutes each week to pick which players they should pick up off the waiver. But those recommendations aren't always fitting for the team that you have in place. So you can't necessarily ride on just doing that method each week. So you have to do your own research. You have to kind of analyze the team that you have in place, see where your needs are in each position, and whether or not the players that you have need to be dropped, and you need to pick up new players to replace them, and whether or not you're going to be able to pick up the players that you want. Like I said, some of them are going to be on waiver. Some of them you can just pick up on the fly. So you got to be careful with that. I mean, my best advice is to use the apps that you're using. Have great resources to review some of these news updates for each player. But you also have to look at the schedule for the player, how the player's playing.
Yeah, matchups are big.
Yeah, matchups are big. Weather plays a factor, whether it's going to be indoors or outdoors. Usually early in the season, it's not a factor, but you get into late November, just
Stormy weather, a little snow,
October,
like
November. Yeah, you're starting to look at all this as well. And now with crazy 2020 and all its glory, you got to keep an eye on things even more now. So you got to use your resources for sure.
I'm going to jump in front of you, Jacob, because I don't want you to steal my thunder.
Take it.
But that is what we're here for. We are Stardom Fantasy Football Podcast. So
we tell you who to start.
If you do have any questions about your lineup, you're going to be faced with tough starting situations all year. We ask each other all the time throughout the season. If we're not playing each other, obviously, who do you like? Should I play him? Should I play him? That kind of thing. You're going to have those tough questions throughout the season, week in and week out. So feel free to shoot us a message on any of our social medias. Feel free to send us
your
email,
full lineup.
Whatever you want to do.
Lineup.
Yeah, take a screenshot of your team, and we'll kind of give some recommendations. They're not always going to be 100% right, but we think we can provide successful analysis most of the time. But yeah, I mean, do your research, learn about your players. You're gonna have expert projections. You're gonna have us to reach out to and help you out. But overall, man, just have fun with it. Learn who you like. You're gonna have players that are really consistent. You're gonna have boom bust players who are gonna have great games one week and then give you 1 or 2 points the next week. So, fantasy football is all projections. There's no guarantees in fantasy football. Your player can go out there and get hurt the first play of the game and give you nothing. So, once you set that person in your lineup and that game starts, that's your guy. You can't take them out. So, matchups, projections. Come to the experts, which I like to think we are. But yeah, that's my recommendations. Jacob, you got anything else?
I think you guys kind of hit everything. And like Ashton said, stay on top of the news.
Mm-hmm.
They've even got TV shows. If you guys are more watching TV, they kind of go through reviews of the weekend. You see clips and kind of how all these teams did, where you can kind of see it on a grander scale and just kind of give you previews to upcoming games as more of a football perspective, but that definitely affects the fantasy perspective as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think we can go on and on and on about different advice and different things to think about when we're talking about who to start. We can talk about weather. Sure. We can talk about lingering injuries. We can talk about everything. But from a starting beginner perspective, I think those are the main things you kind of want to key in on.
And just make sure you set your lineup.
Yeah, 100%. Make sure you set your lineup. Make sure you watch those bye weeks. If they're not going to play, don't play them. If they're injured, don't play them. Just keep an eye on that. And the projections will tell you. Like if they're not playing, if they're injured, they'll tell you that they're projected 0 points. If you do not play, someone is projected 0 points.
And if you have questions or concerns about who to start, just reach out to us.
Yeah.
Just reach out to us.
Yeah, we're happy to help any of our listeners to create the best lineup possible. And if you want to send us your waiver wires and ask, who's a good waiver pickup, we'll try to do that. We are going to be doing 2 shows a week once the regular season rolls around, where we will give you more in-depth players that we're excited for that week, or players that we're excited to pick up on the waiver wire, and things like that. So we will be trying to give it from a large point of view. But if you guys want us to key in on your team specifically, we're happy to do that. So yeah, make sure you send us your lineups. Make sure you send us your waiver wire, and we're happy to help out. But last piece here, guys, which I am the most excited about this whole show. But if you had to provide one tip or one piece of advice for people who are just starting, that you wish that you knew when you were first starting, what would that be?
Oh man, it
So
would be
many
the
things.
I know just one. Can it be like two things?
Nope.
I
You
mean
get one thing.
I would say use the resources that you have available. I mean resources were limited when I started, and they
The
weren't as easily
1800s.
accessible. Yeah, I mean, look, we've come a long way, okay, but I mean it's so easily accessible these days to get
It
all the
really
information
is.
that you need. I mean, from just the internet, from the fantasy apps that you're using on your phone, all the shows on TV that you can watch over highlights. I mean, they have specific fantasy football shows and segments on ESPN and ESPN2, and I mean NBC, ABC. They all have these fantasy shows, and podcasts. I mean, podcasts are huge. I mean, I know we have a passion for podcasts. That's why we do this show. But I mean, we do this show because
We
we've
still
listened
listen to shows.
yeah, I listen to shows nonstop. I mean, and it provides so much information on the fly, especially during a work week when you don't have time to sit down and review your own tapes and highlights and all that stuff. You gotta, you have your own life. You got to work. I mean, even in the car in the mornings or coming back home from work, it's a great time to just listen and catch up to what's going on and the best advice that can be thrown your way. Take advantage of all that information and all those resources and use them to the best of your ability to manage your team to get wins. I mean, that's my biggest piece of advice.
I like it. I like it. Jacob, what do you got?
Ashton took mine.
Sure, there's other
So
tips.
you can go ahead. You go ahead while I think of my other one.
Okay, I gotcha. I mean, my number one.
Sorry, Jacob. Sorry.
My number one piece of advice for your first year is just have fun. Enjoy fantasy football. Enjoy competing with your friends and your family and getting to know how to play it. Like it is one of the things I look forward to every single year is playing fantasy football. It's such a good time. You bond with your friends. You bond with people that you play in the leagues with. It's fun to text them and talk a little bit of crap when you go against them, and it's just good to. It's like it's a nice hobby to have. It's something that's fun.
It really
is. You look forward to every week. You enjoy getting to watch NFL games of teams that you would never watch unless you played fantasy football.
Exactly.
But it's
that's
we're talking to you.
That's
Dolphins
my biggest
fans.
That's my biggest memory of us when we first started playing together in a league was we all three worked together.
Mm-hmm.
And this was the highlight of our day each day during fantasy season, during football season. We'd come into work and we'd immediately start either talking trash about the game before,
talking trades
or waiver wire pickup. It was our center of conversation every day, and we had a blast with it. And it was a great way to meet new people as well. I mean, Stefen, you nailed it. Have fun. That was my second piece of advice, but you said only one, so I'm glad you touched base on that. Jacob, did you figure out one?
Jacob, you're on the
Not
spot.
really, man.
You said there's so many pieces of advice. So many
I know, but we've kind of touched on a lot of this stuff. I would say mock drafting. Actually, that's probably that's way more important. When I first started, I had not done any. I didn't know what a mock draft does. So that was something that really got me prepared in the past couple years on just knowing where people are going. Rhyme. But just really giving you an understanding of what the draft's going to look like. And if you draft enough, I mean, you can have it sends it to your email. You can have set things print out like, hey, this is what it's going to look like. My team could look like if I draft from this spot or from this spot. The mock drafting tool is very important, and I didn't know about it. So yeah, that's actually that's a great tip for you guys, from me. So you're welcome.
Yeah, and I think even with mock drafts, it's not even just about seeing who you could get if you got different draft positions, but also like trying out different strategies.
Yeah,
we always talk about go running back heavy, starting drafts and things like that. But get in there and take Patrick Mahomes or Lamar Jackson in the second round. Get in there and take Travis Kelce and Kittle. Like try doing different things and seeing how the team works out and the way that you like it to work out, and seeing where your weak spots are based on the way that you draft. So. I mean, there's always different ways to try different things in mock drafts, and if you do enough of them, you can learn every different strategy. You can learn how your team is going to look regardless of where you are. But yeah, I mean, I think those are 3 great tips. Mock drafts, you have all your different research tools. You have all the tools at your disposal to, have a great team throughout the season and enjoy it and have fun. And be competitive with your friends. Is there anything else you guys want to tell all these beginners or people just starting? Or
I think we forgot to talk about trades, but just as another way to acquire players. Let's say if you're more deep in one position, like wide receivers or something, you need a running back. A lot of leagues don't do like too many trades, honestly. And it's because people try to take so much advantage of other players.
Stefen.
Stefan's
the trade gypsy.
Last year, man.
Stefen will convince you that the trade that he's offering you is the best trade possible.
Oh, yeah.
That's another tip. Mind
when
control
you have a trade
with
ready,
trades.
Don't get caught. Don't get caught by someone's trade offer.
Send in your trade. If someone sends you a trade offer, send it to us. We'll review it for you. Yeah,
and if you have a gut feeling that it's not the right thing to do, then trust your gut.
If you're going to submit a trade, have your research ready on how to persuade them. Quick.
But
all
ready
the great
for their
rebuttals.
rebuttals.
Tune back into 5 years ago when they were the number one player in that position and feed it to them all day. So
they can get back there.
I always knew what was going to happen when Stefen would creep up behind me at work
and roll that chair over.
He'd roll over, no comment. Then he'd stare at me, and he'd let me look at him for like 10, 15 seconds before he goes, "Hey, bud, what's going on?"
It really is.
I knew a trade offer was right around the corner.
Awesome. Well, I don't think we hit on every single question beginners could possibly have, but again, as we've said multiple times, feel free to send us any questions you have. If you have anything that comes up that, maybe you are about to start your first league, if something comes to you, feel free to shoot us something on social media. We'll try to answer it either in the show or directly back to you. But yeah, guys, just enjoy fantasy football. We're available throughout the season to help with anything that you guys do have come up. We'll be trying to provide our best possible analysis twice a week when the season comes around. We are only 3 weeks away, so it is coming soon. But that's it for us, guys. I think this is a good place to start for people who are beginning their first journey into fantasy football. But yeah, make sure to check out all of our social medias. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We're available on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, as well as YouTube. So check us out. Check out our old maybe even our mock draft and see how we drafted players that we were excited about. But yeah, enjoy fantasy football.
All right. Heck yeah. Goodbye.